Mr. President, before I begin my remarks, just a quick observation. I know that the Majority Leader comes down on a fairly regular basis and, attacks Republicans, particularly House Republicans, for not producing a budget. And, obviously House Republicans, that's their prerogative over there. And it's, there's going to be a budget. It's probably going to be a budget that's put together by the House majority. But I think it kind of misses the broader point, and that is that, at least here in the Senate, which is our domain, our realm of responsibility, it is up to the majority to put a budget on the floor. They control the floor. They have ball control here. They determine what comes to the floor, what doesn't. And if they wanted to put together a budget, they certainly could. And one place to start, obviously, would be the President's budget. The President submitted a budget which, by any estimation, is a massive expansion of the federal government with lots of new spending, $5 trillion in new taxes, mostly on job creators and small businesses. At the end of the budget period, he would add $17 trillion to the federal debt. So budget periods cover a window typically of 10 years, and the President's budget, as put forward, at the end of that 10-year period, would add $17 trillion to the federal debt and also dramatically increase spending. Now, spending pre-pandemic, as we went into the pandemic, was about $4.4 trillion a year, all in federal spending. And, of course, during the pandemic, that increased in a bipartisan way. There were some decisions made to support and increase spending in some areas that were designed to combat and deal with a lot of the adverse impacts of the pandemic. Now the pandemic's behind us. A lot of that spending should have been temporary. A lot of that spending really shouldn't have been incorporated in the baseline. What the Democrats have done is incorporated that into the baseline so that this year, the amount of spending in the President's budget, about $6.9 trillion, is about 55% more than the baseline spending back in 2019 pre-pandemic, at a time when the population in the country has only increased by 1.8%. Now, you could argue, I suppose, if you had this massive increase in population, a lot more people in the country, that federal spending would increase with it. But increasing federal spending 55% at a time when you only got 1.8% population growth in the country seems like a lot of excessive spending spent on expanding and growing the size and the footprint of the federal government. And interestingly enough, at the end of that 10-year period, again, the budget window covers 10 years, spending under the President's budget would be $9.9 trillion. $9.9 trillion. 2019, $4.4 trillion. At the end of the 10-year window covered by the President's budget, $9.9 trillion. More than double, way more than double the amount of spending that we had prior to the pandemic in 2019, and where some of the additional spending that was added at the time was and should have been temporary. So, Mr. President, that's the kind of the contours of the President's budget. That's his plan. And the Senate Democrats obviously could put that on the floor, or they could come up with a different budget. But the point very simply is they're the majority. That's their responsibility. If they want to put a budget out, if they want to vote on a budget, put a budget on the floor. We're happy to vote on it. We'd be happy to offer amendments to it, and they would be amendments that reflect the priorities that we have on our side, which call for less spending, less government, a lighter regulatory touch, and not the massive tax increases contemplated by the President's budget. So just a point I wanted to clarify as we have this conversation around the budget of whose responsibility it is to advance a budget here in the United States Senate. It will be the job of the majority. And so far the majority has not wanted to undertake that task, and perhaps more importantly, I don't think probably wants to vote on the President's budget, which, as I said, adds $17 trillion to the debt, which makes the debt at the end of that 10-year period, the 10-year window, by the way, $50 trillion. $50 trillion. That's what the President's budget would have us at total debt, cumulative debt at the end of the 10-year period, but it adds $17 trillion during that 10-year window and increases spending from $4.4 trillion pre-pandemic 2019 to $9.9 trillion, Mr. President. Pretty stunning, really. But that isn't what I came here to talk about today. Mr. President, I wanted to discuss, because there's been a lot of talk about TikTok in the halls of Congress lately, and I think with good reason, because it's becoming increasingly clear that TikTok poses serious national security concerns. TikTok and its parent company, ByteDance, are Chinese-owned entities with ties to the Chinese Communist Party. And after a Chinese spy balloon floated over our country a few weeks ago, I think it's obvious to everyone that the Chinese Communist Party is hostile to the interests of the United States and spies on American citizens. And I can think of few better or easier ways to spy on American citizens or manipulate American public opinion than to make use of a popular app that is used by over 100 million Americans. In the United States, of course, we have the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution to protect the data Americans provide to apps from being seized by the government. But the Chinese Communist Party has no such restraints. In fact, Chinese law requires social media and technology companies to provide information, including individually identifiable personal information, to the Chinese government when asked. So there's no legal framework in China to effectively protect TikTok users or users of any China-based app from having their personal information turned over to the Chinese Communist Party. And there are already concerning signs that TikTok users' personal information is not secure. It was reported last year that China-based employees of ByteDance had repeatedly accessed private data from TikTok users in the United States, despite TikTok's claims to the contrary. And in December 2022, it was found that ByteDance employees inside China used the app to obtain the locations of journalists who worked on stories highlighting TikTok's national security risks. This obviously has implications for Americans' personal security and privacy. And it raises troubling questions about how the Chinese Communist Party could use TikTok for its own ends, whether that's using personal data to develop sources for espionage or manipulating content to advance the Communist Party's agenda. Mr. President, TikTok is not the first time technology from a hostile nation has posed a serious security concern. Before there was TikTok, we had to engage in a protracted effort to remove technology from Chinese companies Huawei and ZTE from our telecommunications networks. After U.S. security officials raised concerns that much of Huawei's and ZTE's equipment was built with backdoors, giving the Chinese Communist Party access to global communications networks. The digital age has come with enormous benefits, but it also comes with substantial new threats, not least the threat of a hostile foreign government exploiting communications technology for nefarious purposes. And that threat increases substantially when we're talking about technology, from hardware to social media apps produced by companies in hostile nations and affiliated with hostile governments. In recent years, a number of foreign companies in the information and communications technology space, many of them subject to the control of hostile governments, have gained significant market share. Current law provides some remedies for confronting the dangers that these companies present. For example, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, or what we call CFIUS, can block attempted investments from foreign companies if these investments are determined to present a national security threat. But the authorities the federal government currently has were fashioned in a pre-digital age and therefore are not designed for the specific threats posed by digital technology controlled by foreign adversary nations. And as a result, the federal government is limited in what it can do in situations like the one we currently face with TikTok. What is needed is a comprehensive framework for responding to national security risks posed by foreign adversary-owned digital technology, whether that's TikTok or some other app or mobile phone technology or internet hardware. While CFIUS has the ability to address some risks, the reality is that the mere presence of a technology from a foreign adversary in the United States does not trigger a CFIUS review. For a tech platform that does not acquire, merge with, or invest in a U.S. company, CFIUS review simply does not apply. So, for example, WeChat the other Chinese-controlled app that President Trump sought to ban back in 2020, is apparently not subject to CFIUS review. Legislation is necessary to fill this important gap in authority. And that's why earlier this month, Democrat Senator Mark Warner, chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and I introduced the Restricting the Emergence of Security Threats That Risk Information and Communications Technology Act. It's a long way of saying, or the acronym, the RESTRICT Act, which now has the support of 18 senators from both parties. Our legislation would create a comprehensive process based at the U.S. Department of Commerce for identifying and mitigating foreign threats to information and communications technology products and services. I want to emphasize that the authorities of the RESTRICT Act only apply to 6 foreign adversary countries: China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, Venezuela, and Cuba. Under our bill, the Department of Commerce would review any information and communications technology product from these countries that is deemed to present a possible security threat, with an emphasis on products used in critical telecommunications infrastructure or with serious national security implications. And the Secretary of Commerce would be required to develop a range of measures to mitigate the danger posed by these products, up to and including a total ban on the product in question. The bill would also ensure transparency by requiring the Commerce Secretary to coordinate with the Director of National Intelligence to provide declassified information on why any measures taken against foreign adversary-owned technology products were necessary in the first place. Importantly, the RESTRICT Act also requires the Secretary of Commerce to act within 180 days after initiating a review. A common complaint about the ongoing CFIUS review of TikTok is that it has been open-ended and taken years to complete. By comparison, the RESTRICT Act requires quick action to take the necessary steps to mitigate an undue risk from technology of a foreign adversary nation. Mr. President, there is bipartisan acknowledgement that TikTok poses a national security threat, and the RESTRICT Act provides a framework for confronting both current and future risks. I'm grateful to both Republican and Democrat colleagues for joining Senator Warner and me to introduce this bill. It's time to update our laws to ensure that we are able to confront the national security threats posed by foreign adversary technology. And I look forward to working with colleagues from both parties in both chambers to advance the RESTRICT Act and get it to the President's desk. Mr. President, I yield the floor